They said it couldn't happen. An American, in white, standing on that balcony. For 500 years every pope came from the old world, Europe. The ancient churches, the marble halls of tradition. And then, one morning in May 2025, everything changed. Habemus Papam. The crowd fell silent. And when they heard the name, half the world cheered. The other half went very, very quiet. I have been called a bridge. I have been called a breath of fresh air. I have been called a danger. Some say I was chosen by God to heal a church that was bleeding, to speak to a world that had stopped listening. Others say I was chosen by men, powerful men, with agendas, with plans, and that the white smoke rising over Rome was never about the Holy Spirit at all. Tonight I'm going to show you both sides, every truth, every question, every moment that made the world stop and stare. By the end of this, you won't just know who I am. You'll have to decide what I represent. Because 2,000 years of faith deserves more than a headline. And this story is just getting started. My name is Robert Francis Prevost, but the world knows me now as Leo XIV. I was born in Chicago, 1955, a city of wind, of steel, of working people who believed that if you worked hard enough, God would notice. My mother taught me to pray before I could read. My father taught me that faith without action is just noise. I didn't grow up dreaming of Rome. I grew up dreaming of serving. So at 22, I joined the Augustinians, an order built on one simple idea that truth is found in community, not in power, not in marble, in people. For decades, I served in Peru, not in a palace, in the dust, in the heat, among the poor, among the forgotten, the people the world walks past without looking down. Those were my congregation. And then one day Rome called. They made me a bishop, then a cardinal. Then, on May 8th, 2025, white smoke rose over the Sistine Chapel, and 133 cardinals chose me, the first American pope in 2,000 years of history. Let that land for a moment. 2,000 years, and never once an American. Until now. I remember standing at that window, looking out at St. Peter's Square, 200,000 people, crying, praying, reaching towards something they couldn't name. And I thought, God, why me? Not from arrogance, from fear, because I knew what was waiting. A church carrying wounds it hadn't healed. A world pulling further from faith every single year. And 2 billion Catholics looking to one man for answers. I chose the name Leo, after Leo XIII, the Pope who looked at a changing world and didn't flinch, who said the church must speak to the reality people are living, not the reality we wish they lived. That is the mandate I accepted. That is the weight I carry. But not everyone believed I was ready. Not everyone believed my election was pure. Tonight you'll hear both sides. The story of a man chosen by God to renew the church for a new era, and the story of a man placed on the throne by forces that have nothing to do with heaven. I'll let you decide which story is true. Let me tell you what they don't put in the headlines. Before the white smoke, before the balcony, before the crowds, there was a church in crisis. Scandal after scandal, decade after decade, trust shattered, young people leaving not in anger, but in silence, just walking away. And the priests who remained, many of them were asking the same question the congregation was asking. Is anyone still listening to us? That was the church I inherited. Not the golden domes, not the ancient libraries, not the pageantry, the wounds. And here is what I believe with every part of who I am. God doesn't choose the perfect man for a broken moment. He chooses the right man. The one who has seen the dust, who has sat with the poor, who knows what it feels like when the institution fails the people it was built to protect. That is why I was in Peru for 20 years. Not as preparation for power, as preparation for this. Because you cannot lead a universal church from inside a palace if you have never left one. I left. I lived in the margins. I learned the language is not just Spanish. The language of hunger. The language of grief. The language of faith that refuses to die even when everything around it is falling apart. And when I came back to Rome, I brought those voices with me. The first thing I did after my election was not call a press conference, was not issue a doctrine. I called the bishops of the global South, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, the parts of the church that hold 80% of its future but have historically held almost none of its power. I said your voice belongs in this conversation, not as guests, as equals. This is what renewal looks like, not tearing down tradition, widening the table. And to those who say an American cannot lead a global church, I ask you this. What is more universal than a nation built by every nation? America is not one culture. It is every culture trying to find common ground. Is that not exactly what the church needs right now? I am not naive. I know the weight of this history. I know that when I speak 2 billion people are listening. And I know that some of those people are waiting for me to fail. But I also know this. When I stood in that small village in Peru, no electricity, no running water, and I watched a mother hold her child and whisper a prayer at midnight, I wasn't thinking about Rome. I was thinking this. This is what we are protecting. Not the institution. The faith. The living, breathing, unbreakable faith of ordinary people who have nothing except the belief that God sees them. That is the church I serve. That is the renewal I am bringing. And if that makes me controversial, then maybe controversy is exactly what 2,000 years of silence has been waiting for. There is a moment every leader faces, not in public, not on a balcony, not in front of cameras, in private, alone. When the door closes and the noise stops, and it's just you and the weight of everything you said you would do. I had that moment 3 days after my election. I was sitting in the Apostolic Palace, alone. And I looked around at those walls, centuries of history pressing in from every side, and I asked God one question. Not what do you want me to say, but who do you want me to reach? The answer came not in a vision, not in thunder, in a memory. A young man, Lima, Peru, 2003. He came to me after Mass one Sunday, 20 years old, bright eyes, restless hands. He said, "Father, I believe in God, but I don't believe in the church anymore. Is that allowed?" I didn't have a perfect answer that day, but I remembered what I felt. Not judgment, grief. Because that young man was not the exception. He was the generation. And that generation is now 30, 40 years old. They have children of their own. And they are asking the same question their parents never dared to ask out loud. Does the church still have room for people like me? My answer from the first day has been yes. Not a quiet yes, a loud one. In my first months as Pope, I convened a global synod unlike anything the church had done before. Not just bishops, not just clergy, lay people, women, young adults, theologians who had been silenced, communities that had been marginalized. I put them all in the same room, and I said, "Talk. I'm listening." Some in the Curia were furious. They said I was opening doors that should stay closed. I said doors that stay closed don't protect the church. They just make the walls thinner. Because here is the truth that 2,000 years of history confirms: the church has always survived not by resisting the world, but by speaking to it. Augustine spoke to a dying empire. Francis of Assisi spoke to a corrupt institution. John 23 opened the windows of Vatican II when the church was suffocating behind them. Every renewal in history began with one person willing to say something has to change. I am saying it now, and the early signs are undeniable. Mass attendance in the United States up for the first time in 20 years following my election. Youth pilgrimages to World Youth Day record numbers. Seminary in Rome and in West Africa and Brazil the highest in a decade. This is not coincidence. This is what happens when people feel seen. When the church stops talking at them and starts talking with them. I am not perfect. I have made decisions that angered traditionalists. I have made statements that confused diplomats. I have moved faster than some cardinals are comfortable with. But I ask you, when has the right moment ever come to those who wait forever? The world is not pausing for the church to feel ready. The world is moving. And my job, the job God gave me on May 8th, 2025, is to make sure the church is moving with it. Not chasing the world. Walking beside it. There is a difference. And that difference is everything. So if you ask me, was I chosen for this moment? I believe the yes. Not because I am great, but because I have been prepared. By the dust of Peru, by the silence of prayer, by the faces of people who needed the church to show up and found it had already left. I am here to bring it back. If this story is moving something deep inside you right now, just type Amen in the comments. Let me know you're here with me. But wait, there is something the Conclave documents did not make public. Something about the men in that room, the 133 cardinals who cast their votes, and what they were really choosing when they chose me. Everything I just told you is true. Every word. The dust of Peru. The young men in Lima. The Senate. The open doors. All of it true. But so is this. There are men in Rome who have studied every conclave for the last 500 years. Men who understand that the church is not just a spiritual institution. It is the oldest geopolitical force on the planet. 1 billion followers in the global south. Billions more across the west. A seat at every table that matters. And those men do not leave the choosing of a pope to the Holy Spirit alone. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not as conspiracy, as history. Because history is very clear on one thing: every pope who has ever walked out onto that balcony was shaped by the forces that put him there. And the forces that shaped my election were not subtle. The progressive wing of the College of Cardinals had been building toward this moment for over a decade. Since Francis. Since Vatican II reopened questions that traditionalists thought were settled. They needed a successor who could hold the progressive agenda without appearing political. Who better than a soft-spoken Augustinian, with dusty shoes and a story about the poor? I'm not saying I was a puppet. I'm saying the stage was set long before I walked onto it. And once I was on that stage, the politics began immediately. Within weeks of my election, I made statements on immigration that directly contradicted the sitting President of the United States. Not carefully worded theology. Direct. Public. Political. I called certain border policies, and I am quoting myself here, a disgrace to human dignity. The White House responded. The relationship between the Vatican and Washington, the two most powerful institutions in the Western world, fractured. Publicly. In a way that hadn't happened in modern memory. And my supporters said, good. The church should speak truth to power. But my critics asked a harder question. Which truth? And whose power? Because in the same months that I was criticizing Washington, I said very little about the persecution of Christians in China. Very little about the suppression of the church in Nicaragua. Very little about the bishops in Nigeria begging Rome for support as their congregations were being attacked. The silence was noticed. Not just by politicians. By priests. By bishops. By ordinary Catholics who started asking, is our Pope speaking the gospel? Or is he speaking a politics that wears the gospel's clothes? That is not a question I can dismiss. Because I took an oath. Not to a party. Not to an ideology. Not to the progressive cardinals who championed my election. To the gospel, to the full gospel. Every verse, every people, every inconvenient truth. And when a pope is seen to show favoritism, to speak loudly against one nation's sins and quietly past another's, that is not renewal. That is politics, with a white cassock on. And the world is watching closely enough now to know the difference. I have walked into rooms where Catholic leaders, men and women who built their lives around this church, looked at me with something I never expected to see directed at a pope. Suspicion. Not of my faith, of my agenda. And maybe that suspicion is wrong. Maybe history will look back and say Leo XIV was simply a man who spoke his conscience without fear. But maybe, just maybe, history will ask a harder question. When the most powerful religious office on earth starts to look indistinguishable from a political platform, what happens to the 2 billion people who came looking for something that transcends politics? Where do they go? Let me tell you about a conversation I had with a cardinal, a man I respect deeply. 30 years in the church, served under 3 popes, never sought the spotlight, never played politics, just served. He came to me privately, 6 months into my pontificate. He sat across from me in that small office off the Apostolic Palace, the one without the grand windows, and he said, "Holy Father, I need to ask you something. And I need you to hear it as a brother, not as a subordinate." I said, "Speak." He said, "When you speak about politics and you speak about it often, who are you speaking for?" I didn't answer immediately, because the question deserved more than an immediate answer. He continued, "The Church has always had a moral voice. Always. But there is a line between moral witness and political alignment. And Holy Father, I am not sure we are still on the right side of it." I have thought about that conversation almost every day since. Because he wasn't wrong to ask the question. And I wasn't certain I had the right answer. Here is what I know. The church I lead is not one church. It is thousands. The Catholic in rural Kansas who believes the border must be secured, he is my church. The migrant crossing that border with the rosary in his hand, he is my church too. The traditional Latin Mass community in northern France, my church. The progressive parish in downtown Chicago, my church. When I speak politically, I don't just speak for some of them. I speak at others. And the ones I speak at, they notice. In the 12 months following my election, a Pew Research survey found that Catholic identification among conservative Americans dropped 3 percentage points. 3 points. In 1 year. That is not a statistic. That is 3 million people quietly moving toward the door. The same door that young men in Lima walked through 20 years ago. Just from the other direction. And I ask myself, if renewal means the progressive wing grows while the traditional wing quietly leaves, is that renewal? Or is that just replacement? I don't have a clean answer. I wish I did. What I have is this. A church that is 2,000 years old has survived empires, has survived schisms, has survived its own worst moments. It has always survived because at its core, beneath every political storm, every cultural war, every headline, there is something that cannot be politicized. The Eucharist, the cross, the empty tomb. But right now in this moment those things are getting harder to see. Because the noise is too loud. And some of that noise is coming for me. I know that. I sit with that. Every morning. Before the meetings. Before the statements. Before the world gets access to me, I sit in silence. And I ask God, am I still your servant? Or have I become something else? That question has no easy answer. And anyone who tells you it does is not being honest about the weight of this office. But here is what no one has reported yet. There is a document circulating privately among senior Vatican officials. A document that raises questions not about my politics but about the conclave itself. About what was agreed. Before the white smoke rose. Before the world celebrated. Before anyone asked what did the cardinals promise each other in that room? So here we are. You've heard Longier, a man shaped by dust and prayer, chosen by God, called to widen the table, to speak for the forgotten, to renew a church that was running out of time. And you've heard Lungby, a man shaped by forces larger than himself, whose voice, however sincere, has become indistinguishable from a political position, whose renewal may be leaving millions quietly behind. Both are true. At the same time. In the same man. That is not a contradiction. That is what it means to be human. In the most impossible job on earth. Now let me tell you what Scripture actually records. Not my interpretation. Not a theologian's spin. Not a headline. What the text actually says. The earliest leaders of the church were not perfect men. Peter the first pope denied Christ 3 times. In one night. And yet, Christ looked at him and said, on this rock I will build my church. Not on perfection. On a broken man who got back up. Paul, who wrote half the New Testament, was a murderer before he was a missionary. The church was not built by men without flaws. It was built by flawed men who kept showing up. So the question is never, is this pope perfect? The question has always been, is he still showing up? And here is what 2,000 years of church history confirms. Every pope who faced a changing world was accused of 2 things simultaneously. Moving too fast. And not moving fast enough. Leo XIII was called a radical by the conservatives of his time. And too cautious by the reformers. John 23 was told Vatican II would destroy the church. It didn't. It saved it. I am not comparing myself to those men. I am saying the pattern is not new. The noise is not new. What is new is the speed. The world moves faster now than it ever has. And the church, an institution built on eternal truth, is being asked to respond in real time. That tension will not be resolved in my lifetime. But here is what I know, what I believe. Without politics, without agenda, without the noise. The gospel is not a political document. It is a love letter to the poor, to the broken, to the ones the world has decided are not worth saving. Every one of them. Left, right, progressive, traditional, American, Peruvian, Nigerian, Chinese. If my papacy has drifted from that center, then the critics are right to call it out. And I am right to sit in silence every morning and ask God to pull me back. If my papacy is holding to that center, then the renewal is real. And history will see it when the noise finally settles. I don't know which story history will tell about me. No pope ever does. What I know is this: I am still showing up. Every morning, every decision, every impossible choice between the perfect and the necessary. I am still asking the question that young man in Lima asked me 20 years ago. Does the church still have room for people like me? And my answer every single day is yes. It has to be yes. Because the moment that answer becomes no, the church stops being the church and becomes just another institution that couldn't survive its own humanity. 2,000 years of scholars have debated what the church should be. Today it is your turn. If you believe someone you love needs to hear this, today share this video right now. That's your blessing to give them. Sources 60G. Everything you heard today comes from documented sources. The Vatican Press Office official announcement of May 8, 2025. The Gospel of Matthew chapter 20, verse 26. The letter to the Romans chapter 2, verse 11. Pew Research Center Catholic Identification Survey, 2025. Historical records of Vatican II and the Pontificate of Leo XIII documented by the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Full links and references are in the description below. Read them. Question them. Come to your own conclusion. That is all I have ever asked. Now you know what I know. You've heard the case for renewal. A pope shaped by the margins, called to widen the table, to speak for the voiceless, to bridge the ancient and the modern. You've heard the case for caution. A pope shaped by forces larger than any one man, whose voice, however sincere, risks pulling the church into waters it was never meant to navigate alone. Two sides, both real, both documented, both asking something of you. And now it's your turn. Because here is what I've learned in every village, every cathedral, every silent room where faith either lives or dies. Truth doesn't need a verdict from the powerful. It needs a witness from the ordinary. From people like you, who watched, who listened, who thought carefully before deciding. So tell me, Team A divinely guided Pope bringing renewal to a broken church? Or Team B, a political pope whose agenda is reshaping the papacy in ways history will question? Drop your answer below and tell me why. Because 2,000 years of history deserves more than silence. And if this story moves something in you, if it made you think differently about faith, about power, about what it means to lead 2 billion people through a world that changes faster than any of us can pray, then you already know what to do next. There is a story coming that makes this one look like a prologue. The question it asks is older than Rome, older than the church, older than any institution built by human hands. What happens when the man at the top starts to doubt? Stay with me. If you believe truth deserves to be heard, you know what to do. And one last thing. Before you go, before the noise comes back, before the headlines, before the opinions of people who watched less carefully than you just did, sit with this for one moment. Somewhere in the world right now, a mother is holding her child and whispering a prayer in a language Rome has never spoken. A young man is standing at the door of a church he almost didn't walk back into. An old woman is lighting a candle for someone she loves and trusting with everything she has that someone is listening. That is the church. Not the politics. Not the headlines. Not the debate we just had. Them. And whoever sits in that white chair in Rome, their only job is to make sure those people are never forgotten. I am still trying. Every single day. I am still trying.